Have you ever gone camping, seeking adventure in the heart of nature, only to stumble upon something far darker than you ever imagined? What if the forest you've wandered into wasn't just a quiet retreat but a place that had claimed others before you? On a seemingly normal camping trip with friends, you find yourself at Karakoker Forest, a place where the line between reality and nightmare blurs. But when something eerie happens, like the extra tent that shouldn't be there, the chilling whisper in the wind, and a skeleton lying in a decayed sleeping bag, what do you do? As the shadows close in, one question remains. Can you escape the forest, or will you become another lost soul, never to return? Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and like the video to dive deeper into the story. Let's get started. Asterisk. Lucas, Emily, Jake, and Noah were eager to have an adventurous camping trip this summer. The idea of camping in a remote location, far from the city and away from people, and being surrounded by nature excited everyone. While browsing the internet, they came across a legend about an old campsite called Karakoker Forest. It was said that years ago, a group of young campers mysteriously disappeared in the area. The locals claimed that an invisible presence roamed the forest, and those who entered never returned. Jake, of course, dismissed it as nonsense, laughing, "Legends are just made-up stories. If you're scared, let's go, but there's no turning back." No one wanted to back out of the plan. Finally, they packed their backpacks and set off. By the time you arrived at Karakoker Forest, the sky had already darkened. As you made your way to the campsite, there wasn't even a sound of birds chirping. The trees were so densely packed that as you ventured deeper into the forest, it became difficult to see the sky. "This place is strange. Too quiet," you said, feeling uneasy. Emily nodded. "Maybe there really is something here." When you reached the campsite, you found old, decayed camping gear, ripped tents, a rusty camping stove, and scattered, weathered belongings. But the most chilling thing was a rusty sign nailed to the trunk of a large tree, which read, "Get out." Why was this sign here? Or was there really something to it? Lucas laughed, saying, "It's like we're in a horror movie. Maybe it's just some bad prank." But deep inside, you couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. As the night went on, things grew even more bizarre. Sitting around the fire, you noticed a shadow moving between the trees. At first, you thought your eyes were playing tricks on you, but Emily saw it too. "Is someone out there?" she called out, but all that answered her was an eerie silence. Then Jake noticed something. When he counted the tents, there was one too many. "We set up 5 tents, didn't we?" he whispered. But in front of him stood 6 tents. And the extra tent was old, torn, and covered in black stains. "Is someone else here?" you asked, but deep down, you didn't want the answer. Noah, trembling with fear, opened the zipper of the tent, and it was empty. But on the floor, there was a decayed sleeping bag. Inside it, a human skeleton, one that looked like it had been there for years. Emily screamed, and Lucas stumbled backward. Just then, the campfire suddenly went out. Darkness enveloped everything. Out of nowhere, a shrill whisper echoed through the trees. "I've been waiting for you." Suddenly, the tents began to sway on their own. The ground shook beneath you. When you looked behind you, a dark, inhuman figure had appeared in the forest. It was tall, faceless, with nothing but empty, pitch-black eye sockets. You had to run. But in which direction? As the 4 of you scattered in different directions, your screams echoed through the forest. No matter where you went, you always found yourselves back at the campsite. It was as if there was no way out of the forest. Breathless, you saw Lucas's eyes widen in terror. "It's in the tent," he screamed. When you turned your head, the zipper of the extra tent opened on its own. Out of it emerged decayed, skeletal hands. Taking a step back, you noticed something buried in the ground. A broken piece of wood with words carved into it. Once you come, you can never leave. And that's when the darkness swallowed you whole. When the surroundings darkened, you lost track of time. But at some point, when you opened your eyes, you found yourself back in your tent. The campsite was the same. The tents were still standing. But your friends were gone. And in the trees, a figure with pitch-black eyes was watching you. Everyone who came to Karakooker Forest disappeared. And now, you were one of them. Emily, Jake, Lucas, and Noah wanted to make a quick escape for a camping trip on the last days of summer vacation. They wanted to go on a big nature hike, watch the sunset, and sit around the fire telling stories at night. Just the kind of getaway they had been hoping for. However, everything wasn't going to go as they had expected. They did a quick search on Google and found an abandoned campsite, Shadow Camp. There was no information about camping there, just an old photo mentioning a missing couple from past times. But something about it was intriguing. No one's been there before. Sounds exciting, Jake said, trying to convince the group. Though Emily felt a bit uneasy, she eventually followed her friend's enthusiasm, and they set off together. It took over an hour to reach the campsite. Shadow Camp, though abandoned, was captivating in its beauty. By the lake, old trees covered in moss stood, and the silence of nature enveloped them. At first, everything seemed normal. They set up their tents, lit the campfire, and began enjoying the evening. As night began to fall, the atmosphere took on a strange turn. There was no wind, yet the trees seemed to move as if whispering to each other. When Lucas started singing around the fire, a faint laugh echoed from a distance. Who could that sound have come from? I think we've had a bit too much to drink, Noah chuckled. But there was unease on everyone's face. After a while, Jake stood up to head to the tent where they would sleep for the night. He had only taken a few steps when a figure appeared in front of the tent. Its face wasn't clear, but its silhouette resembled a human. "Who's there?" Jake shouted as he approached the figure. But the figure suddenly vanished. As Emily and Lucas waited for Jake to return, they began to feel that something was wrong. "Jake!" they called out, but there was no answer. They quickly began searching for him in the tents. Then, Jake was found inside a different tent, lying strangely on the ground. His eyes were vacant, his skin cold. "Jake!" they cried, but he didn't respond. Instead of waking up, Jake began to tremble. Then, his eyes suddenly opened, but they were empty. "Get up and leave," he whispered. In fear, Emily and the others began to run. As they sprinted deeper into the forest, the bond between them began to break. Each one ran alone, scattered in different directions. Suddenly, Lucas noticed something. On a tree, there was an old plaque that read, "The souls of those who stay here never leave." In the surrounding darkness, he saw silhouettes moving. Then, a figure appeared in the forest. This time, it was a dark human silhouette, but it seemed as if it was the shadow of everything around it. Lucas tried to run faster to catch up with Emily, but with every step, the forest grew darker. At one point, he had completely disappeared. One morning, Emily woke up early in sheer terror and noticed that Jake's tent was empty. However, something was moving around the campsite. The silhouettes appeared near the lake. All the tents seemed to carry the memories of those who had once lived there. As Emily took a step, the zipper of the tent behind her opened by itself. And then, dark hands began emerging from the surface of the lake. The end of everything that had happened had always begun. Lucas, Emily, Jake, and Noah. The four friends had decided to go camping again this year, just like every summer. However, this time, they didn't want an ordinary camping trip. They were looking for something more mysterious, a place yet to be discovered. While examining old maps, Noah came across a place called Silent Lake. There wasn't much information about it on the map, but an old blog mentioned that it had once been a campsite. The strange part, however, was that years ago, the people at the camp had mysteriously disappeared. Jake laughed and said, "Sounds like a classic ghost story. How about we stay there and have a night full of horror?" At first, Emily was hesitant, but she couldn't resist her excitement and agreed. Finally, they packed their bags and set off for Silent Lake. Their journey was challenging. After navigating old, rugged trails, they finally reached the lake, and the view was mesmerizing. The silent, still water reflected a dark hue in the early hours of the night. There wasn't even a breeze. Everything was eerily motionless. They lit the campfire, shared stories, and joked around. But then, Lucas noticed something. Something was watching them from within the forest. A faint human silhouette stood among the trees. Yet, when he blinked and looked again, there was nothing. "I guess I'm just tired," he shrugged it off. But the uneasiness inside him only grew stronger. Do you think it was really just exhaustion, or something else? As the night progressed, strange occurrences began. Despite the lack of wind, the edges of their tent swayed ever so slightly. When Emily woke up, she noticed that Jake's tent zipper was open. "Jake?" she whispered. But there was no response. Peeking inside, she found the tent empty. Jake was gone. Panicking, she woke the others, and they hurriedly searched for Jake in the forest. The moonlight cast a narrow beam into the woods, barely illuminating their surroundings. And then, they saw Jake standing by the lake. His back was turned to them. "Jake!" they called out, but he didn't respond. Emily reached out to touch him, but the moment her fingers were about to make contact, Jake suddenly turned his head. From his mouth came a guttural, inhuman whisper. "Do not follow me." Jake's eyes were empty, as if his soul had been drained. At that moment, Noah noticed something strange on the lake's surface. The reflection. But it wasn't just theirs. There were 4 more figures in the water. Their silhouettes looked exactly like their shadows. Suddenly, Jake began walking silently toward the lake. As his feet touched the water, pale, ghostly hands emerged from below and pulled him under. Emily, Lucas, and Noah screamed, but Jake had already vanished beneath the surface. They needed to run. But where? Every direction seemed like an endless abyss of darkness. The 3 of them ran deep into the forest, but after a while, they noticed something. Their campfire was still burning. Their tents were still there. They had come back. Tears welled up in Emily's eyes. This is impossible," she cried. But there was no way out of the forest. It was as if they were trapped in a labyrinth. And then, a whisper echoed through the trees. "You have returned." Jake stepped out from between the trees. But this wasn't their Jake. His eyes were completely black, and a strange smile stretched across his face. Lucas took a step back. This isn't real." Jake's hollow voice echoed once more. "This camp will never end."